The sun scorched the dusty village road as clouds of dry earth swirled with every step. A haunting metallic clink echoed in the air chains, dragging across the ground. Villagers peeked nervously through windows and half-closed doors, too frightened to intervene, too ashamed to watch. Down the center of the road, a horrifying scene unfolded. A young pregnant woman, her clothes torn and face bruised, stumbled forward, chained to the back of a slowly moving jeep. Her swollen belly trembled. With every step, her cries mixing with the screech of metal and the buzz of a phone camera recording nearby. Her eyes were filled with pain, not just physical, but betrayal so deep it cut to the soul. Each step she took was forced by her in-laws, who sat in the vehicle with no trace of mercy on their faces. Her husband, nowhere in sight. The jeep moved steadily, as if dragging her soul along the dirt, leaving behind both dust and dignity. Suddenly, the scene cracked apart. The roar of an engine tore through the tense silence. A sleek black luxury car came to a screeching halt in front of the jeep, kicking up dust and commanding everyone's attention. The driver's door flew open. From the haze stepped a man in an impeccably tailored suit, his presence calm but dangerously intense. The villagers gasped. Who was he? A stranger? A savior? No one knew yet, but the way he walked, purposeful, fearless, made even the cruel father-in-law tighten his grip on the steering wheel. The mysterious man's eyes locked onto the chained woman. He didn't speak, he didn't shout, but in that moment it was clear, something was about to change. A deep, slow voice echoed in the background, chilling and powerful. They thought no one would stop them. But they didn't expect him. Aisha had always been the kind of girl who found joy in simple things: flowers growing in the cracks of the pavement, the laughter of children, the scent of freshly baked bread wafting through the alleys of her modest neighborhood. Born into a loving but middle-class family, she was raised on values of kindness, resilience, and hope. Her parents, both schoolteachers, instilled in her a belief that real love could overcome any obstacle. That belief was what led her to Rayyan. He had appeared like something out of a dream, charming, soft-spoken, and different from the arrogant, privileged boys she had grown used to avoiding. Rayyan was the only son of a wealthy industrialist family, yet he carried none of the pride or entitlement that often came with such a background. At least, that's what Aisha had thought. Their connection was immediate and intense, blossoming from long conversations and stolen moments into a full-blown romance. When Rayyan proposed marriage, defying his parents' wishes, Aisha believed she had found a partner who would stand by her side against the world. The early days of their marriage were everything Aisha had hoped for: warm, full of laughter, and filled with promises for the future. Rayyan took her on trips, brought her small, thoughtful gifts, and shielded her from his family's disapproving glares. But as soon as Aisha became pregnant, the warmth began to fade. It started subtlest, snide comments from her mother, suspicious glances, whispers behind closed doors. Then it escalated. The once private tension turned into open hostility. Her mother-in-law, a woman with a heart hardened by greed and class prejudice, began treating Aisha like a servant rather than a daughter-in-law. Her father-in-law said little, but his silence was laced with cold disdain. Tasks that once required help now had to be done alone: cooking, cleaning, fetching groceries, even as her belly grew and her body tired. The household servants were instructed not to assist her. They followed those orders, not out of loyalty, but out of fear. The emotional abuse quickly morphed into something darker. The isolation was intentional. Aisha's phone was taken away under the guise of family control. Her visits to her own parents were restricted. Her room was moved to the servant quarters under the excuse that she needed rest. But there was no rest, only tears muffled into a pillow, and conversations held with her unborn child. She tried to explain the growing cruelty to Rayyan, but he had started to change too. At first, he listened with distant discomfort, brushing off her worries as misunderstandings. Then he became cold, distant, emotionally unavailable. His voice took on the same cold tone as his mother's, and his eyes no longer held the softness she once adored. When she begged him to intervene, he accused her of exaggerating. "You know how my mother is. Don't make things worse," he would say, as if her bruises were figments of her imagination. What Aisha didn't realize was that Rayhan too had fallen under his mother's influence completely. The same man who had once vowed to protect her was now complicit in her torment. His silence gave his parents more power, and they used it ruthlessly. Aisha started noticing that even the staff had turned against her. Her food would arrive late, sometimes cold, sometimes not at all. Her doctor appointments were cancelled without her knowledge. One night, when she fainted in the kitchen due to low blood pressure, no one came to help. She lay on the floor for hours, her pleas unanswered. That night marked a shift in her heart. The fear that had been building inside her for weeks finally turned to dreadnought just for herself. But for the fragile life growing inside her, she knew her baby was no longer safe in that house. The very people who were supposed to protect her were pushing her toward the edge of destruction. Her dreams of a happy home had shattered, but her instinct to survive for her child had only grown stronger. Desperation crept into her daily routine. She began writing down everything that was happening in a secret journal she hid behind a loose tile in the bathroom. Every slap, every insult, every deliberate attempt to weaken her. She hoped that one day, if something terrible happened, someone would find the truth. Her parents remained unaware, as she knew they would storm the house and make things worse. She had no friends left to call. Her world had shrunk to a prison, and every day felt like a countdown to something irreversible. Aisha wasn't just afraid of being unloved anymore, she was afraid of not surviving at all. And the most terrifying part was that Rayhan, the man she once believed would fight for her, was the one letting it happen. Zion was not born into wealth, nor did he inherit a legacy of fortune. Everything he had, he earned with sweat, sacrifice, and unrelenting perseverance. The towering figure in crisp suits and luxury cars that people now admired had once been a frightened little boy hiding in the corner of a dimly lit room, watching his mother cry quietly under the weight of his father's fury. Domestic abuse had been the language of his childhood, each day unpredictable, each night filled with muffled sobs and broken plates. But Zion had made a vow to himself as a teenager that he would never become like his father, and that one day, when he had power, he would use it to protect those who had no one to protect them. That vow became his driving force. He studied harder than anyone around him, worked 2 jobs while attending university, and eventually launched a startup that exploded into one of the country's top logistics firms. Today, he was not just a millionaire, he was a name people respected, admired, and often feared in the business world. But despite all the power he had amassed, Zion remained grounded, driven by emotional intelligence and a fierce sense of justice that never dulled. He was known for his philanthropy, often funding safe houses, legal support for domestic abuse victims, and educational scholarships for women. Yet he never did it for publicity. His donations often came anonymously, and his visits to shelters were made quietly, without cameras or announcements. He had built a life of meaning, using his past pain as a blueprint to create something better for others. A few months ago, during a routine checkup at a local clinic on the outskirts of a rural district where one of his outreach programs was launching, Zion had crossed paths with Aisha. She was waiting in line, gently offering her seat to an older woman, despite looking visibly unwell herself. Something about her face, gentle but heavy with unspoken pain, had struck him. They had exchanged only a few polite words, but her warmth stayed with him. He never asked her name, but the memory lingered in the back of his mind like a soft light that refused to go out. Weeks passed, and life moved on. Until one afternoon, while reviewing reports in his car during a countryside drive to inspect a new charitable housing project, Zion overheard something disturbing from a roadside tea stall. The vendor and a group of men were whispering about a pregnant girl being punished by her in-laws in a nearby village. The words used were coarse, but the implications were chilling. "They're dragging her around the road, chained to a jeep," one man muttered, almost casually. Zion's hands froze. Something inside him ignited a primal, furious alarm that drowned out all logic. He didn't ask for names. He didn't wait for confirmation. His instinct had never failed him before, and this time it screamed for him to act. Without hesitation, he jumped back into his car, following the directions the vendor nervously pointed out. As he sped through narrow lanes and bumpy roads, fragments of his past flashed before his eyes: the bruises on his mother's arm, the look of helplessness she wore for years, and the memory of standing outside locked doors, too small to help. When he reached the village, he wasn't expecting to be so deeply shaken. The sight before him was like something out of a nightmare. A woman, clearly pregnant, clearly in pain, was stumbling forward, bound in chains to a jeep crawling along the road. Dust coated her clothes, tears streaked her cheeks, and the sun bore down mercilessly on her broken form. Villagers stood around, silent, complicit in their fear. But what caught Zion completely off guard was her face. It was her, the same woman from the clinic. That brief encounter had returned in full force, and now it wasn't just about principle or justice, it was personal. Rage, sorrow, and determination surged through his veins as he slammed the brakes. His luxury vehicle cutting across the road, blocking the jeep's path. He didn't know what the outcome would be. He didn't care. All he knew was that no one was going to hurt this woman while he was breathing. The chains might have been around her ankles, but the shame, the cruelty, the silence, they were wrapped around everyone's soul. And Zion had arrived to break every single one of them. The tension in the house had been building like a thunderstorm ready to explode. Aisha, once timid and reserved under the weight of abuse, had begun showing quiet defiance. She no longer lowered her gaze every time her mother-in-law spoke with venom. And though her voice was soft, it had started carrying the edge of a woman who had endured too much and had nothing left to fear. She asked questions. She refused to take medicine given to her without explanation. She began locking her room. Small things, but to the in-laws, they were signs of rebellion, insult to their authority. In their eyes, Aisha's newfound courage was disrespect, and disrespect had to be punished. Her mother-in-law, a woman obsessed with dominance, conspired with her husband and son in hushed conversations. She needs to be taught her place, she spat. She thinks her child gives her power. Let's remind her who's in charge. And so, their sinister plan was born not just to intimidate Aisha, but to humiliate her so deeply that she would never dare speak again. That morning, the house was eerily quiet. The servants avoided her, her husband Ryan wouldn't meet her eyes, and the family gathered in the living room under the pretense of having tea. When Aisha walked in, exhausted and already anxious from the cold stares, the trap was sprung. Her father-in-law grabbed her by the arm, his grip bruising her skin, while her mother-in-law screamed insults, calling her a disgrace to their family. Before she could react, two of the house staff dragged her outside, ignoring her terrified screams. A chaincolt, heavy and rusted, was produced, and within seconds it was locked tightly around her ankles and fastened to the rear bumper of the family's jeep. The chain clinked against the pavement as she tried to resist, but the strength of 3 men against her frail pregnant body made resistance futile. The sun glared down mercilessly, casting sharp shadows across the village road. Aisha was pushed forward, stumbling onto her knees, her breath quick and shallow from fear. "Walk," the father-in-law ordered, starting the engine. The jeep jolted forward slightly, pulling the chain, and with it, Aisha. The villagers nearby were drawn by the noise, the shouts, the rattling metal, the unmistakable cruelty, but fear kept them still. Some watched silently from behind doors and walls, others from rooftops, peeking through curtains. A few younger men, phones in hand, began recording the scene, thinking only of the views they might earn, not of the life unraveling in front of them. Children were ushered away. Elderly neighbors muttered prayers, but no one stepped forward. To stop it, the jeep began to move slowly, deliberately, dragging the chain taut with each inch. Aisha struggled to stay on her feet, her sandals slipping on the dust-coated road, her swollen belly pulling her forward. The pain from her legs was nothing compared to the terror clawing through her chest. Her cries pierced the air, pleading, broken, desperate. "Please, please stop, I'm pregnant. She screamed, but the words only seemed to fuel the cruelty of those seated in the vehicle. Her mother-in-law laughed, a sound so devoid of humanity it sent chills down spines even in the heat. "The village, see what happens to women who defy their elders," she shouted, her voice rising above the noise. This wasn't a scare tactic anymore. This wasn't about teaching a lesson. It was an execution of her dignity. A public act of psychological destruction meant to break her spirit beyond repair. Aya's knees bled as they scraped against the road. Dust filled her eyes, clung to her lips, her hair, her skin. Her lungs burned from screaming. She could no longer tell what hurt more, her body or the betrayal that surrounded her. She had once walked this very path with Ryan hand in hand, dreaming of their child's future. Now she was being dragged across it, treated like an animal. And he wasn't even looking back. And still, the village stood silent. Even those who wept behind their curtains dared not open their doors. The jeep crawled forward, inch by cruel inch. The chain tightened again. Aisha fell forward, scraping her palms. Her body trembled. She could feel her baby moving inside her, maybe in fear, maybe in pain, she didn't know. She thought this was it. She thought she might die like this. Until suddenly, the sound of screeching tires split the air. A car, not just any car, but a sleek, foreign machine unlike anything ever seen in their rural lanes, came to an abrupt halt in front of the jeep, cutting it off. Dust exploded in the air as villagers turned their heads, unsure of what had just happened. The jeep's driver slammed the brakes, confused. The in-laws looked up, startled. And then, the door of the luxury car swung open with force. Out stepped a man, tall, composed, and brimming with rage barely concealed beneath his calm expression. It was Zion. The same stranger who had once smiled at Aisha in a clinic, now standing before her, eyes blazing. He didn't look around. He didn't ask questions. He saw her. He saw the chains, and he understood everything in one moment. He moved forward, not slowly, not with hesitation, but with the certainty of a man who had seen enough cruelty in his life to know it when he saw it again. The villagers, frozen in place, watched as this stranger faced the vehicle like it was a beast he had come to slay. And as Aisha looked up through tears and dust, her eyes met his. And for the first time in what felt like forever, she saw something she had forgotten existed. Hope.Zaan stepped out of his car like a storm cloaked in silence. His expression was calm, but beneath that stillness burned a fury so intense it seemed to radiate from him like heat from fire. The dust from his abrupt stop was still settling in the air, but his eyes were already locked onto the scene in front of Himisha, bruised, chained, pregnant, trembling from pain and exhaustion, lying in the dirt like she had been discarded by the world. His jaw tightened as he took a step forward. The father-in-law, still seated in the jeep, shouted, "Who are you? Get your car out of the way." His tone was arrogant, dismissive, but Zion didn't flinch. He didn't respond. Instead, he walked around his car and approached Aisha directly. She looked up, weak, barely able to speak, her lips cracked from crying and dust. In that moment, she didn't recognize him. Could she? The last time they met, she had been standing, smiling faintly, unaware of what lay ahead. Now she was broken, both in body and spirit. But Zion remembered her, and he couldn't stay silent. The father-in-law jumped out of the vehicle, followed by the mother-in-law, their expressions a mix of confusion and irritation. "You don't know who we are," the old man said, puffing his chest. "This is a family matter. Leave before you regret it." Zion turned toward him slowly, the kind of slow that chills blood. "Oh, I know exactly who you are. And I know what kind of cowards hurt women who can't fight back." His voice was sharp, not loud, but it cut through the crowd like a knife. By now, the villagers had begun creeping closer. People who had been hiding behind curtains were now stepping outside. Children peeked from behind their mothers. A crowd was forming, murmurs rippling through them like waves, whispers turning into gasps, disbelief giving way to rage. "Isn't that the girl from the house on the hill? Is she really chained? She's pregnant. The truth was now visible, undeniable, and the people, once afraid, began to stir. The mother-in-law pointed a shaking finger at Zion. "You have no right to interfere. She's our daughter-in-law. She belongs to this house." Zion took a step forward, his presence making her retreat slightly. "She doesn't belong to anyone," he said coldly, "especially not monsters who chain her like an animal." The father-in-law barked, "Leave now, or we'll call the police." Zion smiled, then just a faint curve of his lips, but it wasn't friendly. "Excellent idea," he replied. He pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking directly to someone with authority. Someone who recognized his name instantly. "Yes, I'm in Gary Budd. Domestic abuse. Attempted public assault. I want a team here in 15 minutes. And notify the press, this needs coverage." The father-in-law's face changed. That name's Zion Khan wasn't just any name. It was a name that commanded attention. It was a name that could ruin reputations. The mother-in-law grabbed her husband's arm, whispering, "He's serious. Do something." But Zion was already moving. He knelt beside Aisha, his hand gentle. As he pushed her hair away from her face, "I'm going to get these off you," he whispered. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "Why? Are you helping me?" Zion didn't answer. He reached into his coat, pulled out a multi-purpose tool, and began working on the chain lock. His fingers were steady despite the adrenaline pumping through his veins. With a few clicks, the lock gave way, and the chains fell to the ground with a heavy clink. Aisha whimpered, not in fear now, but in disbelief. He wrapped his coat around her shoulders and gently helped her sit up, shielding her from the eyes of the crowd. "You're safe now," he said softly. "They won't touch you again." The in-laws panicked, realizing they were losing control. They tried to get back into the jeep. "We're leaving." "She's not coming with us," the father-in-law growled. But before they could flee, a wall of villagers blocked the road behind them. Men and women who had once been silent were now stepping forward. "You're not going anywhere," said one man. "We saw what you did." "Shame on you," cried an elderly woman. The mother-in-law clutched her purse tightly, her eyes darting around for an escape route, but there was none. The same village that once looked away now surrounded them with judgment. Phones were out, recording every second, broadcasting the truth to the world. The couple who had once ruled their home like tyrants were now exposed, helpless. Zayn stood up slowly, facing them. "You tried to break her. You tried to destroy not just her dignity, but the life growing inside her. But today, everyone sees you for what you are." The father-in-law's voice faltered. "You don't understand. She disrespected us." Zion's voice turned sharp. "And you think that justifies dragging a pregnant woman across the road like she's nothing?" The crowd roared in agreement. The tension was thick, but this time, it wasn't fire, it was justice rising. Sirens echoed in the distance. The police were arriving, and fast. The mother-in-law began crying, finally understanding that the situation had spiraled beyond her control. The officers arrived, recognizing Zion immediately. After a quick assessment, they arrested the in-laws on charges of domestic abuse, attempted assault, public endangerment, and unlawful confinement. As they were being led away, their heads down, the villagers erupted in claps not of celebration, but of release, of witnessing. Justice served in real time. Zion helped Aisha to her feet. Her legs trembled, but he steadied her. The ambulance he had requested minutes earlier arrived, and paramedics took over, lifting her gently onto a stretcher. She reached out and touched his hand before they closed the door. "Thank you," she whispered. Zion nodded, his eyes wet, but proud. The jeep that had once dragged her like a prisoner now sat abandoned in the middle of the road, chained only by the weight of what had been done. As the crowd slowly dispersed, stories began to spread. Not just of the cruelty I had suffered, but of the stranger who refused to walk away. And in that moment, beneath the burning afternoon sun, the road that had once witnessed her pain now carried the echo of her first step toward freedom. As the police loaded Aisha's in-laws into the back of their van, handcuffed and disheveled. A strange silence spread across the village, not of fear this time, but of reckoning. The same neighbors who had once pretended not to hear the screams or see the bruises were now openly discussing the horrors they had witnessed but dared not confront. Officers catalogued evidence, interviewed witnesses, and reviewed phone recordings that villagers had captured in growing numbers as the confrontation unfolded. Charges were filed: swiftly unlawful confinement, attempted bodily harm, public endangerment, domestic abuse, and obstruction of justice. The mother-in-law screamed that it was a family matter. The father-in-law shouted about false accusations, but no one listened. The weight of the evidence was overwhelming. The people who once thought themselves untouchable were now reduced to pleading with officers for mercy. But there would be none. As word of the incident spread, the story ignited across local news channels. By nightfall, it had gone viral on social media. Clips of the confrontation, images of the chains, and footage of Zion removing them played over and over. The headlines splashed across screens and papers read, "Millionaire saves pregnant woman from in-laws abuse." Within hours, national outlets picked it up, and the once quiet village became the center of a national conversation about domestic violence, abuse of power, and the silence of communities. Talk shows debated the societal failure that allowed such brutality to exist. Online hashtags were trending: hashtag justice for Aisha, hashtag break the chain, hashtag ZAYAN, the savior. For Aisha, it was overwhelming. In the hospital, she lay in a clean bed, wrapped in warmth and safety, unable to fully comprehend how the nightmare had ended, or how her story had become a symbol of survival. Zion had ensured everything was arranged, from private medical care to trauma counseling. A team of doctors monitored her and the baby closely. Aisha, though physically weak, showed incredible strength of spirit. Legal advisors were brought in from his foundation's domestic abuse division. Paperwork was quickly filed to ensure her protection, including a restraining order against Ryan and his family. Zion didn't hover, nor did he take credit publicly. He simply stayed near, ensuring the process didn't fail her again. Temporary housing was arranged for her at one of his foundation's shelters, a safe place with security, support staff, and other women who had survived similar tragedies. There, Aisha wasn't just healing, she was learning to breathe again. Meanwhile, Ryan, who had been hiding behind silence, was finally forced into the spotlight. When questioned by police, he denied knowing the extent of his parents' abuse. But the public was not convinced. Messages he had sent mocking Aisha were leaked. Servants from the house began stepping forward with testimonies. A former housemaid revealed Rayon's long history of emotional manipulation and how he had once slapped Aisha during a dinner because she didn't smile enough. A cousin spoke anonymously, describing how Rayon would laugh when his mother scolded Aisha like a child. What had once been whispers turned into a storm. His family's name, once powerful and respected, became a symbol of cruelty. Their business faced boycotts. Former allies distanced themselves. Rayon's social media was flooded with outrage. No apology came. No explanation. He simply disappeared behind a wall of silence and shame. Aisha, with the support of her legal team, filed for divorce within the week. It wasn't just a legal declaration. Aisha was a final severing of the chains that had held her captive. She demanded full custody of her unborn child and made it clear through her lawyer that she wanted nothing else from the marriage: no alimony, no property, no connection. The court moved swiftly. Given the public attention and overwhelming evidence, her case became a model for expedited justice. The judge, in a rare public statement, praised her courage and vowed to prioritize cases involving domestic abuse going forward. Aisha's voice, once silenced within the walls of a lavish but cruel home, now resonated in courtrooms and on news platforms, inspiring other women to speak up. Some of them came from the very same village. Stories poured out of daughters-in-law locked in storerooms, wives denied food, girls forced into silence. The authorities launched an investigation into domestic abuse patterns across the region. But through all of it, Aisha stayed grounded. She wasn't chasing fame or pity. She simply wanted to live a life free of fear, to bring her child into a world that was safer than the one she had known. Her courage had sparked a revolution of conscience. Her quiet strength had become louder than the screams the village once ignored. And while the world debated, reacted, and shared her story, she focused on healing, step by step, breath by breath, no longer a victim, but a survivor, finally writing her own ending. Aisha's recovery was not a straight path, it was a winding journey of pain, reflection, and slow rebuilding. The physical wounds faded first. The bruises on her legs, the scrapes on her arms, and the soreness in her muscles healed with medical care, rest, and the quiet environment of the safe home provided by Zion's foundation. But the deeper wounds, the ones etched into her heart and mind, took much longer. She struggled with guilt, wondering if she had somehow brought the pain upon herself by trusting too easily, by not speaking out earlier, by trying to hold her marriage together even when it was falling apart. But every time those thoughts threatened to consume her, she reminded herself of one truth: she had survived, and now she owed it to herself. And now she owed it to herself and her child to not just exist, but to live. Therapy became her sanctuary. In weekly sessions with a soft-spoken counselor, she learned to unravel the trauma that had held her hostage. She cried, sometimes for hours, sometimes for minutes that felt like lifetimes. She rediscovered her voice in support groups with other women who had suffered similar fates, each story different, yet painfully familiar. They became a circle of strength for each other. Together, they shared memories, coping strategies, and dreams. Slowly, Aisha began to breathe more freely. Her shoulders relaxed. Her eyes, once dulled with fear, began to hold light again. Zion visited occasionally, always respectful of her space, never overstaying. He didn't come bearing gifts or promises, just quiet support and updates on her legal case or foundation services. Their conversations were gentle, rooted in shared understanding rather than emotional entanglement. He often asked how she was feeling, if there was anything she needed, and then left without pressing further. He never spoke about what had happened in front of others, and Aisha appreciated that more than he knew. There was no expectation between them, only mutual respect born from a moment where one human chose to protect another without asking why. As weeks turned to months, Aisha's strength began to show in ways even she hadn't expected. When a nearby shelter asked her to speak at a small women's gathering, she hesitated. But then she thought of the night she was chained to that jeep, of the crowd that watched in silence, and the voice she wished she had then. That memory propelled her forward. Her first speech was raw and tearful, but her words touched every woman in the room. They wept with her. They applauded her bravery, and they asked her to speak again. Invitations followed to women's support, events, school programs, and eventually, a national TV interview. Nervous but determined, she sat before the camera and told her story not as a victim, but as a woman who had been broken and rebuilt herself. Her poise, clarity, and honesty moved millions. Messages poured in from other survivors thanking her for giving them the courage to speak. Inspired by the overwhelming response, Aisha decided to launch something close to her heart, a small foundation for women in crisis. Named Sahar, meaning dawn. It offered legal help, therapy sessions, vocational training, and shelter. Starting small, with just a room and 2 volunteers, the initiative quickly grew as donations began pouring in after her interview. Aisha didn't seek the spotlight. She sought impact. She worked behind the scenes, often quietly folding clothes in the shelter or serving tea to new arrivals, letting her presence remind the women that healing was possible. She became a symbol of strength, not because she was perfect, but because she had endured and chosen to rise. Then came the day that changed her life once more: the birth of her child. A healthy baby girl with eyes full of wonder and lungs that cried out with fierce vitality. Aisha named her Nur, the Arabic word for light. Holding Nur in her arms for the first time, Aisha felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. All the pain, the shame, the struggle, it melted away in that moment. Her daughter was not just a child, she was a symbol of new beginnings, of a future that Aisha would build free from chains, fear, and silence. Now, when Aisha walks into a room, she no longer carries the weight of her past. Her shoulders are held high, her gaze steady, and her voice unwavering. She speaks not only for herself, but for the thousands of women still shackled in silence. She stands not as a survivor, but as a warrior, proof that even in the darkest of times, a single spark of courage can ignite a lifetime of strength. Months after the harrowing events that brought Aisha out of darkness, Zion made a bold and unexpected move that would change countless lives beyond just hers. Quietly, without fanfare or announcement, he donated a significant portion of his wealth to establish Aisha Safe Homes, a network of secure shelters and support centers. Scattered across the country, these homes were designed to offer refuge, legal assistance, counseling, and vocational training for women trapped in cycles of abuse. Much like the one Aisha had narrowly escaped, the initiative was both personal and profound. Zion wanted to create a legacy that honored her courage and turned pain into hope. No flashy ads or grandiose declarations preceded the launch. Instead, the work began quietly, hands-on and determined, with Zion's foundation meticulously selecting locations where the need was greatest. When the first safe home was finally ready to open, Zion invited Aisha to be the chief guest at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. It was a moment both solemn and celebratory, capturing the full circle of her journey. As she stepped onto the stage in front of a large crowd, community leaders, survivors, media, and supporters, there was a sense of quiet strength emanating from her. She spoke with clarity and honesty about her past, about the injustice she faced, and about the hope these safe homes represented for women who had no one else to turn to. The crowd listened intently, moved by the power of her words and the tangible change represented by the building behind her. But the evening held one more surprise. After the speeches and applause, Zion approached Aisha with a small, elegantly wrapped box. Inside was a symbolic yet profoundly meaningful gift, a legal support package dedicated entirely to her, including access to top lawyers who would ensure her safety and rights were protected indefinitely. Alongside it was a trust fund set up to cover her child's college education, a promise that Nura's future would never be compromised by the scars of the past. Zion's gesture was neither romantic nor dramatic. It was a deep, abiding respect for Aisha's strength and a commitment to her lasting well-being. The two shared a quiet moment of understanding, unspoken but powerful, reflecting a bond forged through courage and compassion rather than love. The media captured every moment, and headlines once again buzzed with praise. From chains to champion the woman who refused to be broken. Social media lit up with support, and the story inspired discussions about domestic abuse, women's rights, and community responsibility. The safe homes became a beacon for change, showing that when courage meets compassion, true transformation is possible. Aisha stood there, no longer a victim or a survivor alone, but a champion lighting the way for others to break free. Aisha sat quietly in the soft glow of the evening light, watching her daughter sleep peacefully in the crib beside her. Nura's tiny chest rose and fell with each gentle breath. Her delicate fingers curled softly against the blanket. A smile spread slowly across Aisha's face, not one of relief alone, but of profound hope. In that moment, the weight of her past seemed to lift, replaced by the promise of a future she was building with courage and love. The chains that once bound her body and spirit felt like distant shadows, powerless against the strength she had found within herself. She whispered a prayer of gratitude, not just for her child's safety, but for the voice she had reclaimed, the voice that would never again be silenced. As the camera lingered on Aisha's serene expression, a calm, powerful voiceover echoed. They chained her to a jeep to silence her, but now the whole world hears her voice. It was a testament to her journey from oppression to empowerment. A reminder that even the darkest moments can give rise to light when someone dares to stand up and speak out. The scene held for a moment, inviting viewers to reflect on the resilience of the human spirit and the vital importance of breaking the silence around abuse. Then, the screen gently faded to black, and white text appeared clear, urgent, and compassionate. If you or someone you know is facing abuse, speak out. Help is out there. The message lingered, urging those trapped in silence to find strength, and reminding the world that no one should suffer alone. It was more than an ending. It was a call to action, a beacon of hope, and a powerful reminder that change begins when voices rise and hearts unite.